Good afternoon and welcome to CCK Live. My name is Jenna Zellmer. I'm an attorney here at CCK and I practice Veterans Benefits Appeals. Joining me today are Emma Peterson and Lindy Nash. They're also attorneys working on veterans claims. So last week we talked about the elements of service connection and how to prove that your disability is related to service. And as a natural progression, this week we're going to be talking about increased ratings. So before we get into how a veteran can get a higher rating for his disability, Emma, can you give us a little bit of background on how a veteran first receives a disability rating?
Sure. So when VA grants you service connection for a particular disability, they look to a schedule of disability ratings. They have any number of diseases and disabilities in 38 USC Section 4. CFR Section 4 has all different diagnostic codes with various different disability ratings based on the severity of symptoms you suffer from. So when you first get service connected, the regional office will look at that criteria, compare it to the symptoms you have, the medical evidence in your record, things like that, and they will assign you a specific rating. So you'll receive a decision saying service connection's been granted for tinnitus, and you're going to receive a 10% rating for that.
And if you guys have any questions as we go on through about this half hour or so, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. We'll do our best to answer them either on the video or in the comments. And also please feel free to visit our CCK website at cck-law.com. There's a lot of great information that we'll be linking to in the comments as well. So you mentioned, a veteran is going to receive a rating decision. What does that look like? Because I think a lot of times veterans receive a lot of paperwork from VA. So they see board decisions, they see rating decisions, they see just random other letters. So how do you identify a rating decision?
Sure. So it will say rating decision on it. It might say DRO, decision review officer decision, but you'll know it when you see it because generally there's two things that are included. A cover letter saying we've made a decision on your appeal or your claim, and then and sort of in plain English telling you what they've done. And then the second document will be the actual decision. There'll be an emblem right in the center of VA, and it's literally centered right in the middle of the paper. And that's the only document that has that sort of seal of VA right in the top center. So if you see that, you see the words rating decision, and then it tells you, we've granted 1, we've denied 2, we've granted 3, and then thereafter you see a bunch of reasons as to why that is your rating decision.
Okay, great. And Lindy, so Emma kind of mentioned that this is the next step after you receive service connection. So why does the rating that you receive, both like the diagnostic code and the percentage, why does that all matter?
Sure. So the rating that you receive is extremely important because that dictates the amount of compensation that you get. So, the higher the rating, the better in terms of benefits that you will receive. And so we'll get into this a little bit later, but your overall combined rating is what truly dictates the amount of money you get every month. So it can be as little as, I believe, a 10% is $140, and then 100% right now, I believe, is just over $3,000. So as you can see, there's a large gap with different, amounts of money, and it really makes a huge difference depending on what your rating is.
Yeah, and I think something that you mentioned was really important was your combined rating, and you mentioned we'll get into a little bit of that later, but you can actually see your combined rating on the final piece of paperwork that's in your rating decision, which is what we call the code sheet. It has a lot of different boxes, and it lists all of your disabilities that you are currently service connected for, what they're rated at, the effective dates that they're rated at, and then what your overall combined rating is. So that's
I will say, though, we have heard from a lot of veterans and seen lately that the VA has not been sending the code sheet to veterans. So if you have one, that's great. That's a really great document to hold on to because, like you said, it has effective dates. When does this happen? When do you get paid X amount of money? And you can ask VA for it.
Right.
But,
if it doesn't come in your rating decision, it's definitely something that you want to ask for.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Either you can, reach out to your accredited representative, a veteran service organization, or, if you're represented by a private attorney, you can see our colleagues at the Disabled American Veterans. They're one of the largest VSOs in the country. So that's great. So, and then, we mentioned a lot about receiving this rating decision, but who is the one person who's actually assigning the ratings? Who's making that initial decision?
So a rater at the regional office will make a decision. They'll be going through the evidence, comparing it to the diagnostic codes and the different disability levels in those diagnostic codes, and then assigning you a rating. So it really is a first line, reviewer who's signing that initial rating. Now, as you appeal it, if you don't agree with it or you decide to move the appeal process, it could be that someone higher up in the chain of
you mentioned
VA,
DRO earlier.
We'll be looking at it, and eventually even the board itself can pick particular ratings, so it might be a board judge if you get all the way up to BVA. So
there's a whole bunch of different possibilities within the VA.
But it starts out with that initial first line rater.
Okay, great. So now that we have a little bit of background on how VA assigns ratings and what exactly, why ratings matter, what they are, what should veterans really consider when they think that they need to file an increased rating?
Yeah, we get this question frequently because sometimes if you're looking to file an increased rating claim, there often comes a little bit of risk with that. If you believe that you're warranted an increased rating, that's great and you should definitely file for it. But before you do, you should always kind of think about the evidence you're submitting, what the disability is. I would suggest looking at the diagnostic code that's assigned to your disability to kind of see how it's broken down and really look at the evidence that you're submitting to make sure that what you have corresponds to an increased rating, because you are running the risk of unfortunately getting a reduction. It is kind of asking the VA to take a look into your file, look at your evidence, look at a recent exam, schedule you for another exam, and it's really drawing attention to your claim. So you do run a little bit of a risk anytime you file an increased rating claim, but if you have the evidence to support it, then you should 100% file for it.
And Emma, how do you know if you're at risk for a reduction? What factors should the veteran consider?
I mean, that's tricky to know off the bat if you're going to be at risk. I think that if you maybe were right on the verge before, or VA has told you that they're going to schedule you for a future exam in your initial decision, or they've even mentioned to you in that cover letter, we think this might be subject to improvement down the line. That's one key that they might be already thinking about looking at your file again. It doesn't mean they're going to do it. They have to give you notice and tell you about why they're going to do it, and you have an opportunity to prevent that from happening. But that's one indication that you might be at risk.
Yeah, I think you mentioned something really important there. If VA has kind of signaled that they think that your condition might improve, and there are certain disabilities that, are subject to maybe more improvement than others. Cancer, for example, is often, when cancer is active, you can get 100% rating, but that's as soon as you're in remission, that rating is going to go down. And so if you're, at a mid-level rating for your cancer residuals, but you're still in remission, there might be a chance there that you would run the risk of asking for a higher rating. Great. So how does a veteran kind of go about asking for a higher rating? Can you appeal the initial decision? Is it a brand new claim? How does it work?
Sure. So so it depends on your situation, but you can, say you became service connected for PTSD 10 years ago and you were assigned a 30% rating at the time and you were satisfied with that. So you didn't appeal and you've had that 30% rating for the last, 10, 20 years, whatever it is. But then recently you're thinking, my symptoms have really increased. I think I deserve a higher rating than this. So right now you can file an increased rating claim fresh, out of the box on what we call the 526 Easy form. So that is a typical form. You can find it on VA's website and you can lay out, all your information and request that increased rating. Or there's another way to do it where if you file your initial service connection claim, you get your rating decision that grants service connection, assigns you, say, the 30% rating, but you don't like that 30% rating. It is not adequate. It doesn't take into account everything you're experiencing. So you can file an appeal with that rating decision and ask for an increased rating from there.
So essentially be filing a notice of disagreement.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
I was just going to say,
and we have a lot of content out there about AMA and the new VA appeal system. So please check out our website, check out our video that details the whole AMA process from beginning to end. But just note that you now have multiple choices to pick when you want to disagree with that rating decision.
Yes.
One is the NOD, and that gets you right to the Board of Veterans Appeals. You also have a couple other options that keep you at the regional office but keep your appeal going. Please check those out because it is very complex. So depending on when that rating decision is issued, you might have to either use the new AMA system, or if you have a decision that's before February 19th, 2019, you're probably still in the legacy system, and you'd have to file an NOD.
Yeah. So I would pay attention to whatever type of decision you have in front of you right now, or if you do file that claim today, you will be in AMA once you get your decision. But if you already have a decision, I would look at the date, and also within there should be instruction as to the type of options you have going forward. So I would consider reading very closely your rating decision.
Right. So so I'm still living in the legacy world, and so which is why I immediately thought about NODs. But another option in the AMA system, which is Appeals Modernization Act, we call it a lot of different things. We'll link to some information about that. Another option is the supplemental claim lane, and so in the supplemental claim lane, the duty to assist still applies. And so if you receive a rating decision that has assigned you a certain rating, and you think that your disability is worse than that, it's possible that VA would still have the duty to help you develop that evidence and potentially get a new exam, and just try to help you demonstrate that you have a higher rating in the supplemental claim lane. And so I think that kind of segues really nicely into kind of what kind of evidence a veteran should submit. In supplemental claim lane, you need to submit new evidence. And so what kind of evidence do you need to support an increased rating claim?
I think there's two key pieces of evidence you're going to want to have. One would be medical evidence, either from your treating doctor or from a specialist that you see detailing your disability, the symptoms you suffer from, and if at all possible, if you can get a printout or show them the criteria VA uses, if that doctor can compare your symptoms to the criteria and even provide, even if it's a short opinion about why you're at a certain disability level, that would certainly be very helpful. The other key piece of evidence that you're going to want to submit, if you can, is lay evidence, meaning statements from yourself. No one knows you and what you're suffering from better than you, but also friends and family that maybe have a different perspective and can offer some corroboration and support to what you're saying about how your symptoms affect your day-to-day life. So spouses, family, friends that you see once a week for a coffee, anyone really can help you support that increased rating.
And I think it's really important to let anybody who you're going to ask to write a statement about you, just describe what they personally have observed. If your spouse, for example, they live with you every day, and so they can probably, track how your disability has worsened over the years, how it's affected them, how it's affected your daily life. And so those can be really powerful statements. So I think it's really important not to discount it in favor of just objective medical evidence.
Right.
And so I mentioned before that sometimes VA will obtain a new examination during these increased rating claims. So, Lindy, what could veterans expect when they go to a VA examination?
Sure. So when you go to the VA examination, probably one of the first things to remember is that you should be aware that the VA, people who work at the VA are watching you pretty much from the minute you step in the door. So just be cognizant that, you are being watched. That sounds sketchy. I don't mean it like that. But just be aware that people are, observing you.
Absolutely.
So keep that in mind. And also now is not the time to kind of hide your symptoms or, be tough and say that it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. Tell them how you're feeling, express yourselves, talk about the pain you're in, talk about everything that you're experiencing. Now is not the time to hold back because these VA exams are heavily relied upon in the rating decisions. I can't tell you the decisions we read, and sometimes they, give no probative value to the private opinions that we submit, but they give all the value to the VA exams. So please be honest and keep in mind that they're looking at your current condition and not what you suffered in service or, the event that has already occurred. They're not focusing on that as much. It's more about your current symptoms and what you're going through right now.
Yeah. And I think that we've previously done an entire Facebook Live on VA examinations. And so there's a lot of information about kind of what to expect at VA exams and how you should prepare. And we can link to that in the comments. But I think one thing that you really mentioned that was powerful to me was that is to be honest, not just in don't downplay your symptoms, but also don't exaggerate them.
Yes.
I think that's kind of what you meant when you said that they're observing you. And also don't get upset that these examiners are asking very pointed questions about your current disability, because I think a lot of times veterans go in and they want to build a rapport with these examiners and kind of explain the history of their claim, which is totally fair. You know, this is something that you live with every day, but the examiners are there for a very specific purpose. They're not there to treat you, and they probably have a lot of exams to go through, and so they're kind of trying to get to the point. And so I think a lot of times we'll have clients who are kind of upset about how they were treated at VA exams, but if you go on there with, you know, the right expectations and kind of know what the VA examiners need, I think it'll help everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. And then a further thing about what I meant earlier is that I've seen it before where doctors say, you know, veteran claims that they use a walker, but no walker was used today. So, you know, something like that. If you use, you know, a cane or a walker or a brace, you know, continue to use that at your appointment. Don't leave it at home or forget it or anything like that, because they will rely on that to further, you know, say you're not credible or anything along those lines. So I just meant, you know, they're looking at the total package.
Yeah. And I think most importantly is that if you do get scheduled for an exam, please go.
Yeah.
And if you can't attend, because sometimes you can't, that's completely fair, call VA and verify that they're going to reschedule that examination, because I can't tell you how many times we've seen decisions come out that just deny the increased rating. The evidence was there, but the veteran didn't attend the VA examination, so they just decide to deny. So if you do get scheduled, or you know you're going to be scheduled, be on the lookout in the mail for a notice indicating when and where that exam is going to be, because you must attend. And if you can't attend, like I said, verify
show some good cause
multiple times over in writing on the phone. Make sure someone's, you know, take down names and numbers of who agreed to reschedule your exam, just in case you have to bring it up later.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what evidence that you need to submit. I think we covered everything there. So I mentioned earlier, you know, the code sheet that is included in your rating decision includes not only your combined rating, but also the effective dates.
Right.
So first of all, I think that we probably have done a Facebook Live, and we definitely have blog posts about effective dates in general. But Emma, can you talk a little bit about, you know, effective dates and when you file an increased rating claim, what your effective date should be?
Sure. So effective date is the date VA is going to pay you at that certain rate. So, you know, if you are being assigned a 50% rating as of June 1st, 2018, you know, as of that month, you're going to start to receive the increased payment in your monthly VA deposit. The effective date for an increased rating will either be the date you filed for that increased rating claims, the date you got that 526 form into VA, or it might even be up to a year before then. So there is a regulation that says that if VA can determine that your rating increased up to a year prior, your effective date could be that date. So it's important to consider submitting evidence and lay evidence about what happened the year leading up to your decision to file an increased rating claim. The other effective date that could happen, as we all know, VA appeals can take quite a long period of time, to the point where maybe your condition has worsened a step further during your appeal process. So your increased rating could also be the date that you became entitled to it. The date that entitlement arose could be in the middle of your appeal period. So let's say you started out with a 10% for PTSD, you want a 30, 5 years into it, you think you're at a 50. Just note that VA could assign you staged ratings, meaning, you know, 30% as of the date you file that increased rating claim, and then a 50 as of 5 years later when they finally got around to giving you a VA exam, and then, you know, so on and so forth. So it really is similar to service connection, but the earlier you get your claim in, the more likely you are to get that earlier effective date.
Great. And I think, you know, you mentioned it can be whenever VA kind of determines that your rating increased. And so, Lindy, how does VA kind of identify when a rating should be effective? And can veterans do anything to kind of make sure that those dates are correct?
Yeah, it's hard to say because VA, you know, does their own thing. But it's always helpful when veterans submit really clear evidence, whether that's a lay statement saying, you know, within this appeal period, starting January 1st, 2012, I noticed a significant increase in my back disability. I was unable to get out of bed and so on. So I'd say the more clear you lay out your symptoms and when you're experiencing them, that could help with any potential stage ratings in the future. Stage ratings aren't usually something that we request. I find that it's usually something VA assigns on their own.
And I think a lot of times the VA will choose the date that the veteran attended a VA examination.
Yes, definitely.
And so that's usually not correct. So generally, if you're filing an increased rating claim, you're scheduled for an exam months later. So it's likely that your disability worsened prior to the time that you were scheduled for an exam, but because the exam really documented it in medical evidence, that's the date that VA chose. So you can certainly, like Lindy said, submit lay statements that kind of correct that, clarify that just because you went to an exam on a certain date doesn't mean that was the day that your exam or your disability suddenly
magically
increased.
I would go further.
All of a sudden
say,
you woke up on the day of the VA exam.
What a coincidence.
So that's something to look out for, because I think that I see that a lot, is that they just choose it because it's an easy date, and they have a lot of claims to process, and so it's something that they can just kind of check off. But all right, so just to wrap up, effective date
question.
Oh, yes, we do. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So this question is from Jack. How do I get a hold of a previous VA denial prior to electronic record keeping? Anybody have any thoughts?
I would start by calling the customer service line.
Yes.
Because VA should have it. I mean,
Yes.
if you filed a claim, they have a claim file for you.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't have been destroyed unless, it disappeared, it fell off a truck.
Right.
Or, it
Fire.
Well, I think one important thing to note was that even though VA hasn't been keeping files electronically for the whole history of VA, they have made a push in the last recent years to make all of the paper files electronic. And so even if you filed a claim prior to when VA was keeping records electronically, that paper file claim should be, I believe at this point, everything should be scanned in to VA system. And so, we see this a lot. You can tell the difference between when VA was keeping electronic records and when VA was keeping paper records, because you see these sometimes illegible copies, sometimes just a little bit harder to read than the electronic copies. But if you have a claim that was submitted prior to electronic record keeping, there's a whole lot of options there. Do you think that the claim was never adjudicated, or are you trying to try to reopen a claim? There's a lot of questions that I think you probably want to talk to a representative about. But if you are looking just for that claim, just to see what it was like and see what you asked for, calling customer service is a really good option. And then, asking your rep or you can probably look at yourself into VA's electronic records management system, which is called the Veterans Benefits Management System. And I think there are a couple other VA electronic records out there. So,
or no harm in showing up at your local RO.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Going in person and talking to a person and explaining exactly what you're looking for, what decision you're looking for, and when it came out, that definitely can't hurt.
Yeah.
So it should exist. It shouldn't be just gone because it was paper and not electronic.
Yeah. Good. So I think, we see this sometimes. Veterans have a combined 100% rating. Is that the end of the road? What else can veterans do if they still think that they're not really being compensated to the full effect that their disability has on their life?
Sure. So there are levels above 100%. Not everyone knows about them, but they're for special circumstances, and because they're special, it's called special monthly compensation. So if a veteran has a particular combination of disabilities that are really above and beyond that 100% total disabling level, and the 100% means you're totally socially and occupationally impaired, or totally occupationally impaired really. So if you have above and beyond that, loss of use of your legs. You need aid and attendance from another person to help you with your activities of daily living, like cooking, cleaning, bathing, things like that. There are extra levels, extra monthly kickers that get added onto your compensation that are available. But those are, like I said, special circumstances. So you'd want to talk with a VSO,
very complicated.
your rep. There's a lot of, in addition to just figuring out combinations, math and VA math, which gets really nuanced and detailed, so you're going to want to talk with someone about that. But know that it exists, because if you need someone else to really help you with your day-to-day life, you might be entitled to an extra monthly amount of compensation.
Yeah, and you mentioned VA math, which I think we mentioned before is related to combined ratings. So VA doesn't just add up a veteran's multiple disabilities and get a nice round number. There's a lot of weird math involved, and so we do actually have a blog post about that. VA has a whole ratings table that you can use to figure out what your combined rating should be, and if you don't want to use that table, you can use our handy calculator on our website at cck-law.com. I use it all the time. So just so you know when you are looking at your combined ratings and you're thinking about special monthly compensation, VA math is complicated, special monthly compensation is complicated. It's definitely something that you want to maybe ask your rep about.
We have another question from Carl.
You want to ask it?
Sure. Can you request a veteran C file? So, Carl, do you mean can we request a veteran C file?
Or
can you request your own? Are you requesting for a friend? No, but in all seriousness, an individual can request a copy of their own C file, their own claim file from VA. They should send it to you on disk, on a CD disk, as representatives.
That's usually because the claims file is thousands of pages
long. Correct.
So you don't really want that.
You don't want the paper file, trust me. But obviously we as representatives request it all the time on behalf of our clients. And
it does take a while.
Correct. So that is absolutely a possibility. But if you were, requesting on behalf of a friend, that probably wouldn't fly.
Lexa asks, does knee instability that causes the use of a cane count as loss of use, or is there a higher standard? That's actually a really great question.
Wonderful question.
I think that there's an argument to be made that it could be, for sure. So special monthly compensation, loss of use, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's basically, would you be equally served with a prosthetic? So if your leg that is so bad that you require a cane, and if you didn't have the cane, you would need a prosthetic, and it would be kind of the equal outcome. You can definitely make that argument. I think it's really important to, as we mentioned before, about kind of figuring out the evidence, documenting everything in lay statements and getting private doctors' opinions and private treatment notes and VA treatment notes, and kind of explaining how badly you can't use your leg.
Right. Yep. So I think the point is that just using a cane on its own is not going to be enough to prove loss of use. You are going to have to meet the loss of use standard, which Jenna mentioned. But we've certainly made, at least at the court level, and I think there's a colorable argument for saying that a cane is a prosthetic. You already are using a prosthetic if you have a lack of propulsion, lack of motion.
Yes, and that's language from the regulation as well.
So there's certainly room to explore that depending on the facts of your particular case.
Yeah, and that's definitely something you want to reach out to your representative about to see kind of, if that meets the criteria for loss of use or a higher rating. And so the last couple things I wanted to mention, and actually Kane kind of reminded me of it. Lindy, you want to talk a little bit about extra scheduler ratings?
Yeah, so extra scheduler ratings are an option, and it basically, I like to think of it as when, say you're service connected for a back disability, and the back diagnostic code is pretty much based on limitation of motion, and that's kind of all it takes into account. But say your back disability, besides limitation of motion, also gives you trouble sleeping, and it causes depression, and you socially isolate because it's too painful to go out of your house. All of those things aren't adequately compensated by the rating schedule. So that's a perfect example, in my opinion,
perfect example
of an extra scheduler rating and when you deserve one. So say, like I said, the rating schedule does not adequately compensate you for what you're going through, then I would suggest filing for an extra scheduler rating.
Yeah, and I think this goes back to Emma's point in the very beginning when we were talking about diagnostic codes and how Section 4 or Part 4 of the VA title regulations is all based on different diagnostic codes, and every disability is assigned a code, and under that code is all different criteria for what meets a certain disability rating. And so if you have something that's totally outside of that rating, outside of the assigned rating, and there's no other real way to get compensation for that, then extra scheduler is an option. Emma, do you have a caveat to that?
I do. Extra scheduler is also difficult to obtain.
Yes.
So I wouldn't put all your eggs in that basket.
No.
But there are circumstances that certainly warrant it.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at, I like to think of it like Lindy was saying, as kind of a gap filler.
Yes.
It's, the diagnostic codes are wide ranging, but they can't cover everything because, there's just a lot out there. So if you have a truly unique circumstance, and it also impacts your ability to work in some way, you might have a good shot at getting that extra scheduler rating. But there are other things you could look to besides that, which would be a separate rating for that depression, a secondary, service connection. There's other ways to go about getting compensated.
And
but
we have some info on our website about that. I think the reason why, the cane question reminded me of it was that we recently, well, I guess it hasn't been that recently now, but there was a case that we attempted to argue that, a veteran's requirement of a cane should qualify them for an extra scheduler rating, because nowhere in the diagnostic code does it mention, having to use a cane. And so, one of our attorneys valiantly argued that, and unfortunately we were not successful, but we did get some really good language in that case. The case is called Spellers, about how the use of a cane informs the level of severity, and level of severity goes to scheduler ratings. So that's just another reason why it's really important. You can just lay out all the ways that your disability affects you and all the different things that you require in order to live your daily life and in order to be able to work, or if you can't work, and then hopefully, especially if you have, a great rep, either a VSO or an attorney, they can kind of use those facts, and there's a whole lot of different options kind of to make sure that you're getting compensated. Either you extra scheduler rating, increased rating, separate rating, lots of different options there. So, and then the final question that I have, and we have a lot of information on our website about this, and so we're just going to touch on it briefly because it does have to do with increased ratings, is something called TDIU. So, want to explain TDIU?
Sure. How much time do you have?
Briefly.
All right. So TDIU, total disability based on individual unemployability, is when maybe through VA math, your combined rating doesn't add up to 100%, but due to your disabilities, you're unable to work. You can't. It's not just work. You can't get gainful employment. So there's sort of a specific standard. VA will pay you out at the 100% rate. So if during the course of an increased rating claim, you realize, hey, I can't work, certainly bring that to VA's attention. They have a specific form, VA Form 8940, that you have to fill out if you want to get that unemployability benefit. But then it can be attached and part of your pending increased rating claim. So something to keep in mind. You don't have to file for it separately. It can be part of everything going on with increased rating.
But if your disability that you're asking for an increased rating claim definitely prevents you from working, tell VA that.
Absolutely. Be open there. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for your questions. Those were so wonderful.
Yeah.
And thank you, Lindy and Emma. My name is Jenna. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next week.